We're talking about whether you can be religious and LGBT plus. Get in touch if you have any comments or questions. Perhaps you are someone of faith yourself and you're struggling with your religion and also your sexual identity. Maybe you have a story to tell. Do let us know. Perhaps you're not of faith and you are interested to find out why some people having this struggle between their religion and their faith and their sexuality. You can get in touch. Just make your comment and it will pop up on this gadget here, and I'll try and get to as many as I possibly can. On tonight's panel, we have David Warren from Christians at Pride. Hello. Rabbi Ariel Friedlander, a liberal rabbi working in London. Did I pronounce your name correctly, Ariel? Just about right. I've tried 4 times. You don't like being called after washing powder?
No, thank you.
No. Ariel. And Mas Naina, who's trustee of Imaan, which is Europe's biggest LGBT plus support group for gay Muslims.
Yes, we are.
Or Muslims who are LGBT plus. Thank you very much for joining us. And the Reverend Bertrand Olivier, who's vicar of All Hallows by the Tower. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to join us tonight. The first question we have, and Mas, I'll come to you if that's okay on this one, is being religious and LGBT plus mutually exclusive? And what's the biggest misconception? So I suppose the first part of that question is saying whether you separate your faith from your sexual identity.
Not at all, and I think our very existence here today shows it's clearly not mutually exclusive, and Islam for me is always been a religion of peace, social justice, of tolerance, so it's always been something that's a very natural thing for me.
Mm-hmm. But are there times when you felt like I have to separate actually who I am from the teachings I'm getting from my faith?
I think more than anything, last year at the Orlando Vigil, when I turned up wearing my prayer cap, there were some people who were coming up, supporting me, congratulating me for turning up being visibly Muslim there, and there were other people who were coming, gay couples who stopped holding hands as soon as they saw me with a prayer cap, thinking...
Muslim couples?
No, there were just gay couples who were not religious, I assume, who just stopped holding hands as soon as they saw me in a prayer cap.
Why do you think they did that?
I think it's a lot about misconceptions about what Islam actually stands for, and I think that's why they were a bit worried. So I think it's a lot of misconceptions about the faith.
So it's not so much that they might have thought there was any threat there that you were going to say anything, that they just were uncomfortable, do you think?
I think there's definitely an uncomfortable truth to be discussed there.
And how did that make you feel?
It made me question whether I was welcome there to be visibly Muslim in the LGBT community, to be honest.
But you dealt with that, I assume, by still being there and trying not to let that get to you too much.
I think it's very important to be visible, not just for ourselves, but to be visible on behalf of people who cannot, who are struggling perhaps more than I am with their faith and sexuality. Bertrand,
as a vicar, how difficult has that been? Because you're a member of a faith, but you're also someone who teaches faith.
Yes. Well, I mean, I certainly, from my own personal experience, when I was a kid and I was starting to come out to myself, it was quite difficult because, of course, the church then where I was teaching that it couldn't exist. And at the time, I remember thinking, praying, well, God, if you don't want me, I don't want you, I don't want anything to do with this. Of course, the real irony is that all these years later, here I am. But I think the big misconception really is that we read the text as it is, that we take it as it is without looking at the history, the context, and looking at different interpretations. And of course, there are Christians who are gay, LGBT plus. There are Christians who are not and who strongly disagree with it. And there is an ongoing theological, scholarly dialogue, sometimes more vehement, sometimes more friendly. But the reality is that in the Church of England we have quite a lot of LGBT plus members, and we really try to be, and we are working for a more radical inclusion, and that's what we're working for on the General Synod, for instance, of which I'm a member. We are trying really to help the church move on in its attitudes and being there to welcome everyone as it's calling to be, certainly in this nation.
Do you suspect that many of your LGBT plus members of the church are in the closet, hiding who they are because of their faith?
Well, it depends on the types of congregations they're part of, and so there are big divide between, let's say, a more liberal Catholic, inclusive side of the church and a perhaps more literalist side of the church where we read the Bible and receive it in different ways. So if you happen to be in a congregation which is welcoming and inclusive, then you can be out and people will support you. If you're not, it can be a very bumpy ride, especially for young people who come out, or even their parents. Some parents get chucked out of congregations because a child has come out as LGBT+, and that's terrible. And that mustn't happen. And we are working to make sure that people are educated, realize what they're doing, and that they live out to their calling of welcome and radical welcome to all.
Ariel, in the Jewish church, is that something you've dealt with yourself as well, having to make peace, if I can put it that way, with your religion and your sexual identity as a gay woman?
Excuse me, should I just say, we don't have churches.
Oh well, you're right. You're quite right to correct me on that. But you see what I'm asking.
Yes, no, absolutely. First of all, I mean, you asked originally about separating your religious identity from your sexual identity, and I think the starting point, certainly from my end of the spectrum in the Jewish denominations, is the separation needs to be in terms of understanding the difference, if you are a person of faith, between God and religion. If God exists, if you believe in God, then God is God no matter what. But religions are systems created by human beings. And because we created them, as we grow and learn more about how human beings are, we are entitled to evolve and change and adapt according to the new things that we have learned.
But of course, not everyone wants to do that.
Yes, but then the question is more to do with the people rather than the religion itself. The values that are taught, I think, in all of our religions are about how to live together in this world, looking after each other, looking after ourselves, and looking after the world, because if we don't do that, we'll have nothing. It's about the nature of relationships. And I was just studying last night with a group of students who want to become Jewish, and we were talking about marriage in Judaism. And the very first thing that you find in the book of Genesis, in the version of the story, not when two people are made at the same time, but when Adam is first, is the idea that God makes a companion for Adam because he shouldn't, as a human being, he should not be alone. He needs a partner. So right at the very beginning of the scripture for us is the teaching that it's important. As a human being, you cannot be whole if you're alone. You need somebody else to share with. And there only happened to be one of each at that time, but it doesn't say anything there about who it should be. And it also says in that story that we are all made in the image of God, which means exactly as we are is how we were supposed to be. God hasn't said, put down these rules that the human beings seem to be following at the moment. And I think that's really important as a starting point for deciding what you're going to do when you're struggling, is to understand that there's always a tension between individual and community. And if you want to be part of a group, you have to conform to some of the group's rules if they're going to accept you, obviously. But when we're talking about faith, ultimately, this is, for people of faith, I believe, your relationship with God, you and God. And therefore, you start with looking at and working on developing that relationship and understanding and knowing, certainly from my understanding of the Torah, that you are God's creation. God made you as you are, and it's a loving God, and you're supposed to be like this, and it's a positive thing.
So for those who would disagree with you, how do you try and convince them that they are wrong, or do you?
I mean...
Because to be fair to them, they have many, many more generations on their side agreeing with them than you do. Your views are quite contemporary, aren't they?
No.
Well, for hundreds of years, if not longer, people have been using religious texts, have they not, to describe LGBT plus choices or lifestyles or sexualities as being against that particular religion.
I would say that perhaps the records show, in terms of what texts have survived and what texts get printed and what texts get kept, the people who had the power to do that chose those and kept those, but that does not mean that this hasn't been in existence, and the struggle and the debate and positions different throughout time, ever since there were people. It's just in terms of society and civilization and who is in control. It's like the winners get to choose what gets printed, but it doesn't mean that there haven't been other people struggling with this, but also having positive perspectives.
David, as a gay man who's Christian, can you tell us a little bit of the story of how you came to be at peace with that conflict, if indeed there was one?
Because it links back to are they mutually exclusive? Can you be religious and LGBT? Because for me, I came out and became a Christian at the same moment. And that's given me a resilience and a real sort of power. I was a teenage, back in the day, student days, coming to terms with my sexuality, keeping it hidden, keeping it repressed, staying in the closet. But it was a progress of looking into Christianity as well that helped me actually come out of the closet. And the vast majority of people are hugely supportive. But the catch is there is the minority, and they're quite often the vocal minority, which are less than supportive, shall we say. And it's those people that get the headlines as well. And that's probably why we're here talking to this. And it's also, I became aware that you don't fit completely comfortably in either community, because the gay community doesn't fully accept Christians or religious types, understandably because of those vocal minorities. And Christian people or religious people don't fully accept LGBT people.
Well, I suppose there are some people who are LGBT plus who would have grown up seeing religion as an enemy to them. And so is that something you're having to deal with when you're talking to people?
Absolutely, yeah. And because the headlines are grabbed by those minorities. Just thinking about Pride, the Pride Parade in itself. Last year at Christians at Pride, we had about 300 people coming to our service, filling the church. All about celebrating Pride and being great and isn't it good, and helping people to worship and come to terms with God, come to meet God, all that sort of thing. And there were 7 to 10 protesters with yellow placards on the side of the march. They got all the headlines. So there's that side of things as well.
Bertrand, if I can come back to you, is that a conversation that you've had with many people who almost feel guilty being of faith, perhaps, that they might be judged?
I don't think they would feel guilty. I think it's once you come to terms with yourself, but you also have a spiritual yearning. To be human is to be spiritual, isn't it? To search for something greater than ourselves. And I'm not sure that. Well, I recognize the tension between not fitting in either community, and that is quite difficult. And in a way, at Pride, you can also get booed when you're the Christians, and some people will boo the Christians or the religious, and that's part for the course. But I'm not sure about maybe self-guilt before that, as you try to discover about yourself. But once you've allowed your faith to shine and help you on your journey, and certainly. For Christians, I think Jesus as an outcast is a real model for a way of liberation, a way of transcending yourself and stepping forth. Then once you've done that, there's probably no guilt, but probably anger at the way in which you've been treated. Once you've clicked that religion is not about control, but it's about liberation and personal fulfillment into something greater than yourself.
You find some people have brought with them some legacy of the way they might have been treated in the past, and they feel like they have some bones to pick.
Of course, and it's very hard to let go of what you've learned in the past, what your fear of what others will say, attitudes, peer pressure. Because if you're a member of a church or any religious community, it becomes part of your life. The people you meet, the people who support you if you're ill and all that, and to suddenly be out on a limb from that is cutting yourself off from a great support network, as well as a group traveling together in faith in any direction. And it feels very dangerous for people. We want to belong, don't we? And the minute you wonder whether you still belong because you have something you might or might not say, that's quite difficult.
Talking of belonging, Mas, if you're reaching out to your faith, to what extent have you found people have been reaching out to you?
Well, obviously we have a long way to go to reach the levels of acceptance that some other faiths have fortunately got when it comes to working with Muslim communities. it is still incredibly difficult to be out. But looking back to how things were 20 years ago to how things are now, so one thing we did was we're organising a big iftar to where people of LGBT people of faith can come together and break fast together, that we're holding in a church just around the corner. But after the events at Finsbury Park Mosque earlier this week, we actually approached the mosque to see whether they could host it instead. The answer was no, but the answer was no because it was already fully booked and there was not enough space. So I think the
risk of being a bit of a troublemaker, you believe that? That was definitely the reason.
I do believe that was the reason, because going inside you could just see how busy it was. But the fact is, even if they're just saying that to be polite, it's not like we were getting kicked out the door, which is how it would have been a couple of decades ago, just in our lifetime. So I think things have come a long, long way.
It's still stark though, isn't it, that the progress is signified by the fact you weren't kicked out of the door, and I suppose that brings into play the fact that religions have been grappling with this question much more over the last 20 years than they have really before. I think that's fair to say, Ariel, isn't it? Do you think that things are moving quickly enough?
I mean, I want to say that I come, I think, probably from a very privileged situation in that my late father was a rabbi who, his best friend that I grew up with was another rabbi called Lionel Blue. And I grew up not knowing really that there was a problem in our home or our family, because Uncle Lionel and Uncle Kim would come round and we'd go over there. My mum went on holiday with them. And I kind of grew up without any real internalized homophobia in that respect. I didn't know myself then, but I had this experience that it was, that, you know, and then when in my late 20s, I figured things out for myself. I was so terribly anxious because of all the things that I'd seen and heard being a supporter, and realizing that that was now pointing at me. But in fact, because I had grown up without this fear, it made me feel a lot stronger because I didn't hate myself. I figured it was other people's problem and they were mistaken and they didn't know. And okay, that's not most people's experience these days, but it did happen to me, and I'm sure there are others, and I guess for the future there will be more and more and more. And it's kind of, I hope it was going to be a snowball effect, and it will, as more people realize that the people they love are still the same people that they love, and society is less condemning now publicly, a lot more people will be able to adjust. And I mean, I learned looking back that the people around me when I came out also needed to come out, and I was so anxious about what was going to happen and how afraid everybody, afraid of all of the possible things, that I wanted everybody immediately to say, okay, we still love you, everything's fine. And ultimately they did, but they also needed time. So when you ask how quickly, each person has their own way of working and growing and developing. But I think that the more it spreads out like ripples, and the more that it happens, the more comfortable the next people will. And I stand on the shoulders of people for whom, people in the rabbinates, when I was in rabbinical school, nobody was allowed to know if you were gay. There was a secret group that met to support each other. My year intake, we were the first year that had anybody who was actually out in their interview, and that's 25 years ago. And we never thought that there would be marriage legal anywhere in our lifetimes, or that, we could, so much has changed very, very, very quickly. I'm just hoping that exponentially it's going to grow and grow, so that even if people disagree, there's not going to be the same hatred. It's just going to be okay. We can be tolerant of each other, but there will be a space for people to have their opinions. But our young people will not be so ashamed and scared that they take their lives. That's the...
And so ashamed and scared that they don't come out as well, which leads us to our next question, which is, are there any challenges that can make it more difficult to come out for LGBT people of faith? Mas, do you mind me asking you whether you could tell us a little bit of your story and how it was to come out as a Muslim?
For me, well, it's interesting where you asked that question, because there's coming out as LGBT plus within the Muslim community, but also we explore coming out as being a person of faith in the LGBT community as well, which can be for some people equally as difficult. For me, coming out, it was difficult. It is still difficult. It's not fully accepted still in my family, but I have come to just be grateful for the relationship I still have with my family. And just looking back, just 50 years ago, it was illegal to be gay. So I think we also had to be patient and give it time. But one thing I do want to say is one of my friends, my best friends, actually came out to his mum last year after crying, after having a big showdown. One thing she turned around and said in the end was, children may leave their parents, but a mother will never leave her child. And that really stuck with me, that no matter what happens, never underestimate the power of love that parents have for their child. But there's one issue that I think for gay Muslims in particular is forced marriage. And people who are members of our organisation, there's a number of people who have been forced into marriages, heterosexual marriages that they did not want to have, a lot of people are still being pressured into marriage. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we are still struggling to overcome. It's one thing I'm still struggling to overcome is still the mention of marriage, even after coming out. Something my friends are still going through, even after you come out as LGBT+. There isn't, like, people don't give up.
Is that sometimes a reaction to the suspicion that a child might be LGBT+, or a child coming out? That then sometimes the reaction you're saying is to say, well, okay, we're going to arrange a marriage and that will be almost like a sticking plaster, to put it like that.
Completely. That will cure you and it'll all be better. And if you're gay, that's okay. Do your thing on the side, but we want you to still get married and have kids. And I think that's still like a big problem in the community.
And is that linked to a social pressure in the community about saving face, or is it because there's a genuine belief that it might change the way someone is?
Partly it's true that they do think it'll cure you, but I don't think that's the biggest thing. I think the biggest thing is really this idea that you're going to bring shame on the good family name, especially a lot of religious communities are close-knit communities. You go to the same mosque, the same synagogue with your local community, and it's about bringing shame on your good family name. That seems to be more of an issue rather than how they personally feel. So I think my mum doesn't care too much about my sexuality. She's more worried about what will all my neighbours, what will all my friends think. I think that's more of an issue.
It's worth pointing out that's not something that's exclusive to Islam, is it? I mean, in Christian homes around the country, many people have similar stories. The idea of bringing shame on your family or embarrassing your mum and her neighbours. Is that a problem that people have come to you with when they're talking to you about perhaps wanting to come out?
Not specifically, but I certainly recognise that my mother is very happy with me, but she doesn't talk about my life to anyone else much, because that's you have to come out to yourselves, and parents have to come out also every day, and that's we forget about that, and it's more or less difficult depending on what they do, where they live, and the outlook of their community too. But I also the issue of, it's not forced marriage, but I think there are probably quite a number of Christian people who would think, oh, I'll get married because that will sort me out, and maybe it is just a phase, and the Bible tells me I shouldn't be doing this, and I'll try something else. So of course, that ends up usually in disaster, because that's not what they're meant to do, really. And that's a terrible waste of relationships,
and it's not just young people either, because there's people that were entering into marriages thinking that will help, that will cure them, that will help their feelings. And the churches were supportive of this, and that means that people are now coming out in their 60s, 70s, 80s with families, with children, and having to face that, bring that courage really to come out as being bi, gay, trans, whatever.
You're absolutely right to bring that up, because often when we talk about coming out, we often are thinking of younger people, but increasingly older people are coming out, and that's a whole different set of challenges. Maybe you've had an experience like that. I don't know if you have at home. Hello. If you have at home, maybe you could get in touch and let us know your story. Dillis has got in touch. He says, as a Christian, I support anybody who is LGBT+, and like my daughter and her wife, who were blessed with a church wedding, a very, very dear friend of mine is a Church of England vicar who lives very happily with his male partner, and both are clearly loved by their congregation. Is there more acceptance of gay clergy? I'll ask.
Well, people have always,
First
you know,
mention
the
since you were-
reality is that the Church of England would have probably not gone so far if it hadn't been for its gay clergy. There's quite a lot of gay clergy who work tirelessly to keep parishes going, and probably loads of gay clergy in relationships that are loved by their parishioners in many places that you wouldn't even think of. But it's then when you try to bring some kind of understanding that actually it is good and it should be known about, because we need role models. Young people need to know that actually it is kosher. I was going to say, but it is part of life. These are the gifts that God gives us, and we have to exercise them, or we have to shine them, and that's difficult because the organization and our having a coherent theology that can encompass the diversity of views on this is difficult to achieve, and particular now with the internet. And if we express a view in London, within seconds in Lagos, an African bishop will have a very violent and contrary view, and so it's not just the plodding Church of England not doing its thing, but it's also global consequences that they affect people's lives, but they also affect a kind of global politics, which really was not what religion should have been about in the first place.
So, as a distraction, I suppose one of the most important things is to talk about it, so that's great that we are here tonight talking about it. Andrew says, if anyone's watching in Lagos, by the way, then do get in touch. Andrew says, you learn religion, you are born gay. Personally, I don't feel like the 21st century has the need for religion anymore. An interesting question for yourself, I think, David, because you kind of found peace with your sexuality and then found God at the same time.
Absolutely.
So what do you say to that?
I say that there's it's not for everyone. I agree with that, and I totally get that. But there's proof out there that there's so much about spirituality and religion that can give you mental buoyancy. I think I was going through a time of mental trauma before I came out, and that just really sort of dissolved away once I became a Christian and came out.
Do you think you could have found that through yoga? And meditation and other things. I'm sorry to sound facetious, but someone might say, well, you don't need religion for that. There are other ways to find a peace and a happiness in your life without finding God. Why did you go that way?
These are religious practices.
They all come from the same thing.
Then baking,
mindfulness, all these sorts of things. A lot of people, a lot of LGBT people are spiritual, have a spiritual nature. And it's where you want to channel that, yes. And I found a comfort in going down the Christian route. And that's what chimed with me. It may not chime with everyone, and then there's other religions out there as well.
I'm sorry, but I have to go back to what I said before about separating out God from religion, because any human being who is looking for the spiritual relationship, yes, community is important, and finding communities that serve your community needs, and the idea of being in a family with other like-minded people is very important. But it all begins with your individual relationship with the deity, if that's what it is that you're looking for spiritually, and so in that sense, I think if you can find that and trust in that, I think it also gives you a core that you can go into different communities, whichever one it is, and I think that's what for all of us makes us able in our religious groups to be able to stand up and say these things when it might be difficult, and face people who look at us strangely, and deal with family members who have problems with us, because ultimately we found something that helps us be true to ourselves and be able to be the best person that we can. And then you go on from that. You don't automatically get a happy ending just because you found that, but you get a root, that's something that holds you so that you can be strong and share and cope like every human being does, religious or not, with the positive and the negative sides of life, but having something within you that can give you that strength. I think that's really the important place to start, and it doesn't, and that is you and whatever your relationship with whatever you call your God is, or not your God. So
there are those, I suppose, who feel that religion is outdated because of science, and that science has obviously shed some light on LGBT identity and sociology and all sorts of sciences, not just biological ones. Is there an increasing argument going on there between religion staying relevant and those sciences, do you think? In other words, is it harder these days for religion to stay relevant in an LGBT person's life than it, say, would have been 50 years ago?
Well, I feel religion's lasted on this earth for thousands of years because people have always been believing in a higher power, call it what you may. And I think that yearning for that belief and that peace you get from prayer will never go away. And it doesn't need to be incompatible. It doesn't really need to be incompatible. You don't need to take anything, any scripture literally. At the end of the day, you believe in God. That's all it takes for you to be religious. You don't need to really look at anything else to see if this is compatible with this.
Ariel's made a really good point a couple of times now that there's a distinction between organised religion and one's personal faith. As a Church of England vicar, if someone said to you, well actually I'm Christian but I don't want to go to your church because I'm LGBT+, would you understand that?
Well, I would understand that people are cautious about organised religion. LGBT plus people would be fearful. I mean, I think it's certainly incumbent on us to be as welcoming and open as possible. I personally think it is difficult to be a Christian on your own, and I can't speak about necessarily other faiths on this particular topic, but because Christianity as is a religion which is all about community. It's about learning together, about looking after one another. It's about growing together, and really it's because of that rubbing with other human beings that you realize that actually you're not the center of the world, but there is something bigger than you, and together you learn that on a journey. So our scriptures would inform our discussions, and obviously we start with scripture, and we would have a range of interpretations, and that's it's with good discussion and with good disagreement and praying together that you grow, really. And perhaps people are not so keen on religion today because we have a great sense of individuality. We do everything on our phones quickly. Religion is about, you need to take time, you need to sit down, you need to discuss, you need to eat together. That's a real important aspect of most of faith. And most people eat on the hoof with a phone or whatever. And it's so, in a way, countercultural that it's really hard to get into unless you either come to a crisis point and that's your entry into something different, or you've had some education into it, or for some reason you're intrigued and then you seek it out. But it doesn't normally happen quite like that.
For me, there's a part that society's changed. I mean, as Mar said earlier, relatively quickly, 50 years ago, homosexuality was decriminalised, which is, geologically speaking, yesterday. Right. Some of the holy books and the texts that the faiths go back to are thousands of years old, and people are referring to them over these years. So it will tend to change slower, but they do change, and that's the hope. There's like you said, science has kicked in, so people were convinced that there was a flat Earth.
Yeah.
That's changed. People, all the writers in the Bible were convinced that heaven was just beyond the clouds. That's changed. We now know that, just beyond the clouds, there's a universe out there.
I'm not saying that there shouldn't be also community. I'm just saying for the starting point for yourself, especially if you're struggling, that's where you start. But of course, human beings are social, and we want families and groups to be part of and to share things with. One person, or the partner first of all, but also absolutely. I just think that if we're talking to people who are struggling and they're thinking that the religion has done terrible things and that they're afraid or they think they might be rejected, I think it's that you shouldn't automatically discount the religion, but the starting point is to find your place, your nature, your relationship, your God for you. And then with that, then you can go and seek and find a community that will welcome you. I just think that helps, especially in those times when you are alone and you don't know where to go. It's something you can do even without to begin with. And then from there,
And for a lot of people struggling with their sexuality, of course, those lonely times and times of darkness, I suppose many of us can remember times we felt like that. And certainly for yourself, David, that's when that was helpful. Ogolo has got in touch saying many gifted, closeted LGBT people keep places of worship running in Lagos and in other states in Nigeria. Yeah. So thank you very much for listening.
Yes. Well, I meant to come back about that because, of course, we need to be very, very aware of the plight of gay Christians in Africa. And I mean, and as part of what the work we do is certainly linking up with and trying to support those who are suffering in these very polarized countries. So.
Yes, and I suppose when we talk about those atrocities that might be carried out or other religions, when you look at what's happening in Chechnya, for instance, people see that and they think, well, the excuse that's being used there is religion, and therefore religion has a responsibility fundamentally for what is happening to gay people. How do you have that conversation with someone when they're basically laying it at your feet, Ariel, when they're saying you're a religious person, so you have to take some responsibility for some of these things that are happening around the world?
I can only say, I mean, I'm not all powerful, I'm not God, and I can't reach out to there and do something, but what I can do is what is possible for me to do in my life. And I will say I am doing everything I can in my life with everybody I meet, with what I teach, with, you know, to help change that. And I wish I could go and save all those people's lives, but because I can't doesn't mean I also quit. I think that it's important to have people within these religions with the voice that is different, and you know, if I were to just give up, then that would let these things continue. So I do the small thing I can, which feels very small to me, but you never know. I mean, our religions have a teaching which talks about you save one person, it's as if you save the entire world. And therefore, I do whatever I can and hope, maybe, if I'm lucky enough, that I can change even for one person. Then that, for me, is the beginning. I mean, I don't want to get all caught up and arrogant and say, I'm going to go out and fix everything. So to this person, I say, look, you came to me, it's terrible. I can't stop that now, but I'm doing everything I can in the process to alter it so that hopefully more people will get involved and eventually it will be stopped. And that's all I can say. And if it's not enough for them, I'm sorry. But I think that considering the 50 years ago and the difference and what you're saying about geology, it's already such a change.
Can combine to make a great change, can't they?
Yeah.
Lisa
Right.
Jane has got in touch. She says, hi, Pride in London. Hi. I have to say I found it harder to come out as a Christian in the LGBT community than the other way round, although that is hard too. So again, it's coming back to this thought that actually, and you said the same thing, didn't you, Mas, that actually, I'll come back to you on that, coming out as Muslim to gay people is almost as hard as the other way around. And if you had conversations with people who said you're not allowed to be Muslim and gay?
Completely, and I think it comes to, again, what we started with, misconceptions, because again, going back to faith, like the Quran actually says that on the Day of Judgment, the first thing God will ask is, where are those people who loved each other for the sake of my glory? And only the people who love each other will be taken in by God. One of my favourite sayings of the Prophet is, he who sleeps on a full stomach while his neighbour starves is not one of us. So looking at core faith, it's just common sense and it's something that is completely compatible, but I think there's such misconceptions, and I think that's a lot to do with media representation of what faith is. And I think the biggest thing we should do is encourage these people to come to churches, to come to synagogues, to come to mosques, just to meet other people of faith and just to be open to it.
Absolutely. What is being done, I mean, off the back of that question, what is being done to show people that believing in a higher power and being LGBT plus can go ahead? I mean, do you think enough is being said in messaging to combat what you were just talking there with the media perception? David?
More can always be done, and Pride is one of the key things for that, showing that LGBT people, we're not monsters, and some people portray LGBT plus people as that, which is why we get into trouble in some churches. However, Pride is showing that actually we're just human, we're just normal. Me and my civil partner, we're at home, we're watching TV, we're just boring old, the rest of it. And life carries on. There's nothing, untoward going on there.
Pride is a fantastic example, actually,
It
of
is.
practical things that are being done. Other than Pride, are there other actions being taken, moves being made to show people that actually you can be Christian and gay, for instance?
Well, I mean, I think there's certainly, the inclusive church movement and churches signing up to that and being visibly open and welcoming to people. I mean, inclusivity is obviously goes beyond LGBT plus, but certainly that and being, talking about it and being upfront about that, but also certainly working at General Synod to try and get the messages there and try to keep it on the agenda so that things change. And our organisations change very slowly because by nature we want to try and bring everyone along if possible. And so we always try and do as much as possible to not exclude anyone. And that's then the question is, how liberal can you be? But
well, it's LGBT month. Are there churches doing, inviting LGBT people into the churches? Are there clergy giving sermons this month saying this is why we shouldn't be anti-LGBT plus?
Well, I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are up and down the.
Because I wouldn't know, so I'm asking. I'm
absolutely,
interested.
Yes. And then there are. I mean, our vicar's recently said that she's put the flag in the sand and said, look, actually, this church is inclusive, it's accepting, everyone's welcome. And there's an increasing number of churches that are doing that, where it's not an issue to be LGBT plus.
Well, that's the thing now. I was thinking, how when it's my turn, how am I going to answer this question?
It's your turn now.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I kind of took it. No, so I mean, I was part of the group that founded something called Keshet UK, which for the Jewish community is an umbrella group for LGBT things in this country. And one of the things that they do now is, they send people to different communities to help them understand and to sort of train them to be more inclusive, places that previously hadn't been. But in fact, in terms of the LG part, I suppose, because nobody really talks about B much at all, which is another issue in the community. But the thing is that once you get some recognition for yourself, it's very easy to sit back and be comfortable and not do very much anymore. And I think certainly in liberal Judaism, we're very conscious of the idea that you have more freedom and more rights, but there's still people behind you who haven't yet got to where you are. And so, for example, now the trans community is in a stage which maybe 20 years ago I would have said the community that I felt part of then was. So supporting and raising awareness there. Liberal Judaism has been working very hard there. Sean Knan has run the Rainbow Jews project, and now Twilight People, which is gathering testimony from people throughout the country, photographing, making exhibitions, making people aware of the diversity and the fluidity of gender issues, which is, I think, sort of like the next bit that's coming up now that has been difficult in the past. So, I think it's just important to note that while things are getting a little bit better in one place, then we should remember that there are always people, just because it's not your particular personal thing, people supported me when I was down, and when I have some way to do that for somebody else, I have to, what's the phrase, pay it forward. So there's always hopefully going to be something that needs to be worked on, and hopefully always people who, once they are more stable in their own way, are going to share the privilege that they have and help to pass
I'm
it
so
on.
pleased actually that you brought that up. We do talk so much about the LG. If you're trans and Muslim, how easy is that? I mean, that's got to be extremely tough in a completely different way.
Well, we actually have lots of trans members of Imaan, and Imaan's been going for over 20 years now. And over the last couple of years, we've had our trans membership really increase. A lot of it came after the change in law allowing LGBT people to seek asylum. So for us, a lot of the problems we face is helping people with asylum claims, people settle in, and that tends to be more of a battle than finding reconciliation with being LGBT and Muslim and being trans and Muslim. So things like housing, things like legal advice. So that tends to be more of a pressing issue for a lot of the trans members that come to our events.
Georgina has got in touch to say exactly dialogue, two-way dialogue, both sides listening is what's needed. On the trans question, Bertrand, can I ask you, is that do you have experience in that when a parishioner has said, well, I'm trans and I'm not sure I'm going to be accepted by the rest of the congregation, for instance?
I've not particularly in that particular question, but I have certainly worked in a parish with a trans organist, for instance, and I have colleagues who are trans in both directions, either from female to male or male to female, and who've gone through that journey within the Church of England, and I've been lucky to be supported by their bishops and either remain in parish ministry or often in chaplaincies in hospital or in other settings where perhaps things are slightly easier. And again, it's really important to have, and they are willing to be role models and talk and really both do the theological work, which is important because, of course, the people who will be anti will want to see that there is some serious scholarship being done, which, you know, try and link scriptural authority with what's happening, but also just being able to put heads above parapet is important. So I being trans, well, it's not the same as coming out as LG and B, but nevertheless it's a personal journey which is quite painful, and I suppose we have some empathy with it, or without
takes a lot of bravery as well, because it's something that obviously people will notice, and so that obviously takes a lot of strength, doesn't it, to
Absolutely.
do that. Our last question tonight, to skip on, what advice would you give to those who are trying to juggle who they feel they are on one hand and what their religious texts and beliefs tell them? So how do you put into words with someone who's really struggling with their sexual identity and their sexuality, the way they should kind of move forward positively in their lives, being religious?
I guess I start with, for a Jewish person, the Torah says, you are made in the image of God. And being true to yourself is also having faith that this is who God means you to be, who a loving God means you to be. And that's the start.
And once you find that in yourself, then you can find strength then that that's who you must be.
Yes, absolutely. Because, I mean, in the end, my understanding of all of Judaism in a quick nutshell is that it's about the nature of relationship, and that human beings, our responsibility is to do what we call tikkun olam, which is the healing of the world. All of the damage that we have done, we have to try, ultimately, the ideal aim is to heal this world. And so, if you are not whole yourself, how can you possibly go forward and do something like that? So it must start with you in that way. And after that, then our community and the support and the people who understand and know we work together, and we can hold people as they gain their strength. And then hopefully,
What if someone internally sits quietly with themselves and can't quite find the answer as to who they are, who God wants them to be, and then looks for advice from their church or from their faith or from a text and gets the wrong advice? Sometimes people don't have the strength to find it within themselves.
The key for that is actually just know that you're not alone. That the path that you're going down, whether you're trying to reconcile your faith with your sexuality or you're just coming out as LGBTQIA plus whatever, you are on a journey that someone else has been on before. And there are support groups out there. There are other people. There are churches like Bertrand's church, which is fully inclusive. You can go and talk to people there. You can get on Diverse Church as a Facebook group. You can talk to One Body, One Faith. There's loads of people there that will be a safe pair of ears for you to actually talk things through with. You might not quite agree with everything yourself, because if from an early age you've been told one thing and this is the only way to believe it, then actually you might have a bit of time needed to work it out in your own head. So make sure you find some friendly faces, as well as those that are around you in your church or in your place of religion.
I think there's a slight difference just in terms of people, if you're coming to a minister or a leader in the community, because for many people that person is somehow the representative of God to them. And if they come to you and ask you, I think obviously you're not alone, but I think it makes an incredible difference to some people just to hear a person who's part of that previously enemy sort of group, the representative of God. I don't want to take, but I mean, that's how people often see you. To hear that person say, no, God does love you. No, you are exactly as you're supposed to be, and it'll get better. It will get better. To hear that from the representative of your religious community, I think is very powerful.
I can imagine that would be very empowering and very moving too. Bertrand, if there are people working in the church who maybe don't give that advice, though, it's not a flight of fancy to say, is it? That some.
Oh, it's not a flight of fancy. People will either, there are people who will say, no, you can't possibly, or there are people who say, well, you can work with that, but really your life has to be very severely curtailed, and you can't be physical at any stage in your life, and which is not being human, really.
And if someone's had that experience, that might have completely knocked their attempts to be who they are. So where on earth do they go?
Well, I mean, so the question, and of course the church and any of our presumably organizations lose people at that point, because if you've been rejected in that way, not taken seriously, or being offered a way of life which is really not at all what you think you're capable of or even want to do, then why would you do it? But I wanted to, if I may come back to the previous part, I have worked, I was talking to a young woman at one time who was really had real problems with reconciling herself, her sexuality and the church. And despite saying everything that I could, I didn't feel I helped her or moved her on. And I think the biggest journey is about learning to love ourselves, and that's hard, because we have an image or a picture of who we might be, and children and husbands or wives or whatever, and suddenly coming out is a really painful letting go of a whole life before you that you thought you were going to have, and suddenly that's not it. And it may be fun to be a young, very self-assured gay man in London or something, but most people don't live in these kinds of circles, and suddenly they're confronted with an image which they can't live with. And
Can I tell you what my dad told me when I came out to him? We were walking down a railroad track in Jerusalem, and I was really, really anxious. And I told him, and he looked at me and he said, Ariel, I had a picture of how your life was going to be. Now I need to change my picture. He said, I'm worried because there are people out there in the world who will hurt you because of this, and I can't protect you from it. But for us, what he said was he needed to change his picture, not I needed to change. And that, in the end, I think is the essence of what we're hoping to do here, is to help people who have a problem with this to change their picture, rather than the people who actually are LGBT+. Why should we change? We should be ourselves. But in this process of education and growth and development, and that for me, when my dad said that was just like, then it was okay. It's like he got it, and I can be me, and everything's going to be okay. And I can just hope and pray that everybody gets that.
Well, Jake says, I'm part of an inclusive church now, which is great. United Reformed Church, but I'm the only gay man there, and I have a friend who is undecided. And I suppose, Jake is there as well as the church to help his friend come to terms, I suppose, with the feelings that he's having and the person he feels he wants to be. Andrew says, accept yourself and an amazing journey begins. Heart. Yeah. I couldn't think of a better way, really, to come near the end of our discussion. Zohar gets in touch and says, I agree with everything Rabbi Friedlander has said. I am trans and Keshet volunteer, and the work we do is so important to me. The best and worst experiences in my life have been within Judaism. That's why I value my work so much. I can help improve acceptance so other Jews don't have some of the experiences I have. And I think Zohar and Jake have something similar there in their story, where they're standing up and saying, I am who I am, and therefore other people can be too. And Mas, that's what you've done. I assume people around you have flocked to you in a way and said, well, you've done it, maybe I can as well.
Yeah, to echo what everyone else has said, firstly, know that it is okay to question and to be uncomfortable. That's perfectly natural. And to know that it does get better, I think that is important. Secondly, the thing about not going through it alone is so important. that you don't need to go to this alone, because the first time you're going to Google, is it okay to be gay and Muslim? The first 50 results will be no. So it is to get in touch. There's brilliant groups like the Inclusive Mosque Initiative, which basically, if you've never been, they're based in London. It just really just stretches the definition of what a mosque is. Doesn't matter what your sexuality is, doesn't matter gender identity, doesn't matter where you're from, what you believe, how you want to dress. Everyone just comes, plays together, side by side, without questioning anything. And I think that's a wonderful thing. So don't go through it alone. And thirdly, if you are not religious, but you're LGBT plus, don't just simply be open-minded, but take a proactive step and visit all the LGBT plus religious organizations and show your support. So most of them are done completely by volunteers. They need a lot of money to keep the events going. A lot of them just need someone to just stand side by side and tell them it's okay. Like after the events at Finchley Park Mosque, when I went to the vigil, after the vigil, I went in to pray. And the biggest thing for me were two of my gay Jewish friends, including a student rabbi, who actually came inside the mosque and prayed side by side with me in solidarity. So I think it's that interfaith work, as well as people who are not religious coming and showing the support, is also important to get the word out there and to really increase visibility.
A big part of sending out the message that religion is accepting of LGBT plus people is matching with the rest of society and saying, okay, same-sex marriage is now legal, therefore we're going to accept it. Tricky question, we don't have a crystal ball, but do you think, Bertrand, that is something we can look for from the Church of England, for instance, in the next 10 years?
I think 10 years may be pushing it, I regret to say. But I mean, I think it will eventually happen, but it will take a while. The theological discussions around marriage are complex. We've seen some of members of the Anglican family recently. The Episcopal Church of Scotland have changed their canons on marriage to now be non-gender specific. So the marriage is now open to both heterosexual couples and same-sex couples in that church. When same-sex marriage came into force in Britain, the Church of England negotiated this quadruple lock, which would require us to go through not only General Synod but then Parliament, and so they've created a way of really blocking the change for some not inconsiderable time. But nevertheless, there will be progress. We're hoping that certainly the House of Bishops is going to come up with some plans for their new teaching document at General Synod at York next week. We don't know what's in it. We are hoping that the talks of radical inclusion by the archbishops after the last synod are going to be evidenced in some way forward, particularly in terms of blessing or a service of blessing of same-sex marriage. We can already do service of thanksgiving after civil marriage, and so it's not a complicated thing to move on. But it's every step is hard won, and of course it's not like a referendum. If we have to make those changes at General Synod, they usually require 2/3 majority, which is a huge in all three houses, which requires a whole political.
I'm so sorry to cut in because gosh, I know we're all wanting to say more about that because it's such a viscerally important thing for all of us. As you say, we're all making steps, and you guys are all on a journey yourselves as well. Hoping, I suppose, I can sum up that one day we will get there with inclusivity with same-sex marriage, but also that everyone can be religious and be themselves, whatever that self may be. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. David Warren from Christians at Pride, Rabbi Ariel Friedlander, Liberal Rabbi working in London, Mas Naina, trustee of Imaan, and of course the Reverend Bertrand, Olivier, vicar at All Hallows. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you to Zohar and Andrew and Jake and all of the wonderful people who watched this live and got in touch with your comments. It really enriched what we were talking about tonight. So do tune in next week for next week's live, and make sure that you send your comments into. For now, good night.
Good
Good night.
Good night.